Okay, so my clock says it's 12:02, so we might get a start. Hello everyone, my name's Eleanor Huntington. I'm the Dean of the ANU College of Engineering and Computer Science, and it's my very great honour to be a member of this very important initiative of the university, and it's also my pleasure to moderate the ANU Below Zero Emissions Workshop today, particularly around leadership and targets. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and celebrating the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet today and over whose airwaves we gather, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm standing on the foothills of Black Mountain, which sits on Ngunnawal land, and I extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So this workshop is being recorded and it will be shared, so if you don't want your comments recorded, please submit them anonymously in the chat or by email to belowzero, all one word, at anu.edu.au at any time. So for a little bit of orientation and context, this is the 7th and final workshop in this series where we're asking ANU staff, students and the external community to contribute to a discussion about how ANU can reduce its contribution to climate change by going below zero emissions as quickly as possible. But this is an opportunity for everyone to contribute to the process in a meaningful way and tell us their ideas and engage and grow other ideas as well. So the consultation is open until next Tuesday, the 20th of October. So, and you can contribute in two ways. This workshop is one of them, and today we'll be discussing how ANU can show leadership in setting targets to go below zero emissions, something that no other Australian university is aiming to do at this stage. So that makes this institution rather remarkable. Besides these workshops, you can share your ideas and interact with other ideas on IdeaNote. Links and instructions about how to join are in the chat. And you just need to click on the tab called chat in order to see that. So the chat window also contains other links, including registering for the upcoming workshops, although this is the last one, and access to recordings, things like that. So today we've got 5 speakers. Each will speak for 3 minutes as a way of sparking discussion, and then we're going to open the floor for discussion with everyone here. So I'd ask that everyone keep their ideas or comments to 1 minute so that we can make sure that we have time to discuss them and give everyone a chance to speak, and particularly in this situation where what we're trying to do is pick up other people's ideas and advance them. So the way to do that is to use your raise hand function in Zoom. You can find that in the participants tab, and then you wait on me to call your name so that we've got some sense of how to have the flow of the conversation run. So I'm now going to introduce Professor Brian Schmidt, the Vice Chancellor of the ANU, to talk a little bit about his introduction to ANU Below Zero and why he thinks this initiative is important. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you everyone for being in this time where it's easy to think only about 2020, being prepared to think about the rest of our lives and the lives of the people who come after us. So Eleanor, thank you for your acknowledgement to country. You know, here on Ngunnawal Ngambri land, which the ANU is built, we're part of a world that is changing. It's part of a world that had 80% of, for example, the Namadgi National Park ravaged by fire earlier in the year, which we all saw from here. So parts of that have only reopened. If you do have your have your microphone on, we're getting a little bit of stuff coming through. So we all know what climate change looks like as we watch it happening around us, and people who had even their own homes under threat here in Canberra and in areas around down at the South Coast especially. So while we're starting to rebuild all around here in Australia, we now bear witness with great empathy those who are experiencing similar hardship and distress across North America from a very similar set of circumstances. And of course, fire is just one manifestation of the changes, the global changes that we're seeing. We do know that there's a lot within fire, for example, to learn from Indigenous land management, which had 65,000 years to figure out how to deal with this. And there is huge amounts of knowledge and experience to see generation after generation's adaptation to this curious land that we live in and how it interacts with the climate. And we know that the challenges are going to increase in frequency over the coming years. Indeed, I see global sustainability as the single greatest threat that humanity is facing. I would say it's even approaching an existential threat because humanity is not good at rearranging itself as the world changes around it. And so on the face of this, I think the onus is on all of us to do everything we can to reduce the negative impacts we have on the climate. And that includes us as a community. I guess I would say, especially us, people look to universities like ANU to lead the way. Because I'm telling you, no one else is going to lead the way. And if it's not us, it ain't going to happen. At the moment, our activities are contributing to climate change through the direct and indirect emission of significant quantities of greenhouse gases. And what we know is that simply reducing our emissions to net zero is not going to be sufficient to maintain a safe and stable climate. Unfortunately, that bird has flown. And we are now having to go through and figure out ways to actually go below zero over the future. Now, thanks to the wonderful emerging sets of technology, we can see ways to do this, but it isn't just going to happen. It requires activity. And one of the things that I really want us to do as a university is to convert all of the amazing work we do into how we actually act. And clearly, in terms of climate change and our greenhouse gas emissions and other things, that is a place where we're world leaders. And we have the opportunity to convert that into real activity. But it can also be in all the other aspects of what the university does. And we're going to be looking at figuring out how to do that. But this is sort of our first step in that direction. So we know that as our unique mission, we need to make a strong stand in this area. And the good news is political parties of all persuasions are beginning to get the sense of what lies before. So it's not a fight, it is actually leadership. In February this year, ANU Council endorsed the creation of the ANU Below Zero Initiative, and it was there to lessen the impact of climate events on staff and students, to adapt to and mitigate the changing climate and its consequences, and further reduce the emissions intensity of our investment portfolio, and to further strengthen our world-leading climate research and deploy this to inform and support the development of policies and initiatives that will effectively deal with climate change at both the national and international levels. And finally, to strongly speak in public and to work with industry and government to address the dangers of inaction on climate change, and also the benefits and opportunities of effective strategic action on climate change. So the ANU Below Zero Initiative really aims to transition ANU from being part of the problem to becoming part of the solution, a source of greenhouse gases to being a net absorber. And at the same time, by integrating the real life emissions reductions and carbon drawdown with our research and teaching on climate change and energy, we can fast track new and innovative approaches. Now, we're all reflecting today on our financial situation. And the operating environment for an initiative like this could be seen as being, it's not the right time to do it. We need to just push this back into the future. But I'm sorry to say the world is changing, and it has to be part of the new ANU, the ANU that is emerging out of post-COVID-19, to be the ANU that the nation needs. And so I see this as being part of that, but I also see it as a place where investment now contributes to our teaching, our research, and our outreach, but it actually will lower our costs and provides opportunities as well. So I don't think it's something we could or should postpone. And indeed, it is literally investing in the future. And in the end, I think we'll actually have a very good, positive in return for the university, financial and otherwise. So I am extremely proud of the work that we're embarking on this. I look forward to not being the only university doing this in Australia. I looking us at drawing a coalition of the willing in with us, and in that sense, helping create Australia's future as a vibrant place where we have prosperity coupled to essentially a globally sustainable way of doing things. And I really thank everyone for being prepared to be part of this today. And I'll stop there and hand back to you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Brian. So we will continue to cycle through the panelists and then we will open the floor for all sorts of really interesting discussion. So I'm now going to hand to Professor Mark Howden, who's the director of the ANU Climate Change Institute. And Mark's going to give us a brief discussion on the latest projections around global temperature rise and a brief overview of some of the ideas around leadership that have emerged from other workshops and what that suggests in terms of developing ANU targets. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Eleanor. As the Vice-Chancellor has said, there is really a significant urgency in terms of climate action. So, for example, this year, we're on track to be the equal hottest year on record. So the 12-month global temperature at the moment is 1.3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial. And remembering the Paris Agreement goal is, if possible, keep it to 1.5 degrees. We're getting perilously close to that 1.5 degrees. And we've seen a foretaste of the consequences here in Southern Australia last year with the fires and the smoke and the heat, etc. And just today, there was a study published which showed a 50% reduction in corals on the Great Barrier Reef in the last 25 years due to warming. Climate change is here, climate change is now, and it doesn't look good for us. That's why ANU, Australia, and the globe need to curb emissions ambitiously. And as a university, we get this. A recent survey of ANU staff and students showed that we were much more concerned than the Australian average in terms of climate change. And Samantha Stanley may comment on this a little bit later. We understand that it is not enough just to go to net zero emissions. The science says clearly we need to go below zero, and that's what ANU is aiming to do. The challenge is matching this knowledge with action. And to do that, we need to lead. And in this context, leadership includes doing the right thing for us, for other Australians, and for the globe. It's making things happen that would otherwise not happen. It's generating innovative solutions, and it's helping other people go down their own path to reducing emissions and their footprint. Now, of course, there's lots of low-hanging fruit to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, things like swapping out gas heaters for electric ones. We need to do that as a matter of course, especially where it saves money, but we need to go above and beyond. And that's why our Below Zero program has actually had these consultations and had the Idea Note platform for ANU people to put up their ideas. So far we've had 168 ideas submitted, 125 comments on these ideas, 351 likes, and 140 users engaged. So just a very, very sort of short sample of what has come up on the Idea Note platform. For example, we've looked at people suggesting long-term mechanisms that are embedded in the structure of the university, for example, in finance and purchasing. So one example of that is we can find alternative means for funding things like installation of solar PV on campus or off campus by going down a community solar pathway. Other groups in Canberra have already done this. In this case, it may be offering ANU staff, students, and alumni an option to actually buy into that program, creating capital for those assets that is off the budget, so it doesn't cost jobs, that pays dividends each year to the investor in a predictable way, and it creates an asset for the university. So it is still owned by ANU. This is a win-win where we can actually have benefits in terms of financial benefits for the university and for the investors. It supports ANU going renewable, reduces our footprint, and it means we can have control over these projects where otherwise we may not have such control. And importantly, it builds ANU community along the lines of Below Zero. We can do things, innovative things like establishing a district energy loop so that we can actually transfer energy, waste energy from the national computing infrastructure to adjacent buildings, not just to heat them, but if you do this properly, you can heat or cool buildings as needed, drawing from that energy in the energy loop. Thinking about energy and mass transfer in different ways. It's not just about a single system that only has one output like heat. It can be many different things. We can establish things like an ANU green shed that encourages the sharing economy, or physically or online, selling secondhand goods, books, clothes, electrics, etc., to reduce consumption of new items and prevent waste. And this could help build an ANU green identity and community. We can develop mechanisms for the trial and hire of e-bikes on campus to encourage active transport. It's a new technology, not everyone's aware of it and how good it is, but it can overcome some of the barriers to active travel that people have identified in surveys here at ANU. And this could be outsourced, so it's become a business proposition. And the last one I'll mention is we need to ensure that climate action is embedded in the new ANU identity and ANU brand that Brian was just talking about. We want this to permeate through each sector of the campus and help support pro-climate social norms. This is really vital, that action, good action, becomes normal, not an exception. And whether that's the cafes on campus, the way we travel to work, or all of the things we do at work, we need to think about them and find alternatives which have a lower greenhouse gas emission footprint. We need to incentivize behaviours and empower individuals to make greener choices, because that's not only in our interest individually, but it's in our interest collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm now going to hand to Paul Duldig, who is the ANU Chief Operations Officer. Paul's going to talk about how we can integrate emissions reductions into ANU operations. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Eleanor, and hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nations here in Melbourne, just north of the Yarra, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'm very excited to be part of the Below Zero efforts as well, and the kind of things I've been thinking about is, as Mark's saying, how do we turn our aspirations into actions? And it's not easy. As human beings, I think we're good at that kind of living in the middle distance in the abstract, thinking about the future, and not as good about taking actions in the present. We're also sort of odd in a way in that we actually gain utility from thinking about doing things, and we feel good about thinking about doing them. And sometimes we feel better about that than actually doing them. So, so I'm always interested, how do we actually get actions in an organisation? And it's, you know, there are some signposts from other things that have been done in large organisations that have been successful over many, many years. Firstly, to really drive action though, people I think need to feel that it is something that is at least part of their aspiration. And I'm really interested in the survey that was done recently by Samantha and Zoe, and they'll be talking about that in a moment, I'm sure. But I think one of the really interesting findings was that most people in the ANU surveyed that they thought that it was almost an equal responsibility between the institution and themselves. And I think that's good, because obviously they are part of the ANU, and so their individual needs and wants, if they align with the institutions, that's going to make it easier to achieve, but it is a shared responsibility. So I think about it pretty much along the lines of, what does the organisation need to learn how to do? This is a challenge around organisational learning. And so there are examples from other areas. And one that might sound a little bit off-piste, but I think is relevant, is workplace health and safety. If you wind the clock back 20, 25 years ago, workplace health and safety was the responsibility of the HR group. You know, there was not as much embedding of that as being something that actually needed action in your local area, in your office, in your workplace, walking upstairs, and so on. So, you know, what we can take some leads from the way that workplace health and safety is actually embedded across the entire institution now, and it is influencing the way people act. And what are the things that needs? First of all, it needs data. So at the moment, we're kind of flying blind. We're talking about being below zero, and we, you know, thanks to Mark and others' efforts, we know that actually we're, you know, we're not doing well, but we need the data to be available and ubiquitous. Secondly, we need better planning. So we need to build carbon and greenhouse gas impacts into our planning, into our financial planning, into our building planning, and so on. And thirdly, actually in the budgets. So I'd actually like there to be, as a little bit of a trial, one idea is that people don't just have a travel budget in their areas, they actually have a carbon budget for their travel? Can they live with not just the dollars, but also the carbon impacts? Because that's actually when it really starts to get real, when you're trying to actually make sure that your behaviour matches your aspirations. And finally, you know, how can we tap into the behaviour change expertise that we have as an institution? And I'm sure that is world class. And how do we actually design interventions that are going to be genuinely taken up by people in the here and now? Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Now I'm going to hand over to Kate Donnelly, who's an ANU Master of Climate Change student, and she's going to talk about the need for ambition and other ideas to demonstrate leadership. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Eleanor. I am just going to pop over to a share screen. All right, I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm also calling in from Naarm, also known as Melbourne, on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respect to their elders. I was beyond excited to read the ANU Council's resolution earlier in the year, and it's really great to hear such high-level commitments from the Vice-Chancellor and the ANU Council. So I really think that ANU has a unique set of resources and opportunities to lead the way. I think there are two key points that we should try and keep in mind for the development of the Below Zero strategy. I think the first is that ANU is uniquely placed to set ambitious targets. I think we can be an early adopter of the technologies and cultural shifts that will allow us to address difficult emission sources and establish scalable negative emissions approaches. I think that our target should be structured around this opportunity and responsibility. I think the second point is that our networks amplify our impact. And it's great to hear the Vice-Chancellor speaking about a coalition of the willing, because I think other institutions can and should benefit from ANU's learning and investments. I think that by proactively sharing what we learn and do, we can help accelerate the ambition and pace of other transition plans. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to explore what these principles could look like in practice. So we know that there's a couple of other Australian universities who have stepped up to task. So for example, Monash and the University of Sydney have both adopted net zero targets for scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by 2030. I've put a little key down the bottom for folks if you're not quite familiar with what those refer to. And we know that ANU has a head start in our scope 2 emissions thanks to the ACT's renewable electricity supply, which I think means that we get to focus our investment on reducing those hard to reach reductions from scope 1 and scope 3 sources and accelerating those net negative technologies and approaches. That's obviously not going to be easy, and I appreciate that it's difficult to set targets that are so heavily dependent on emerging technologies and cultural shifts. But I think we can learn from the governance approaches of other net zero frameworks. So for example, New Zealand's approach to methane emissions reduction is a potentially useful case study. Last year, New Zealand legislated a target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which was seen as a pretty big deal. But they were also criticised for failing to include methane in that target because methane accounts for approximately 40% of their national emissions and is in some way the worst greenhouse gas than carbon. It was excluded because it's really difficult to reduce, especially given the importance of the agricultural sector in New Zealand. So to address the challenge, they ended up adopting a tiered approach to targets. The government committed to a reduction range for methane emissions, which may be increased depending on emerging technologies and approaches that they're actively supporting through research and development investments. So I think that for ANU, we could adapt that approach by adopting a tiered reduction targets based on scope with regular technical reviews with a view to increase our ambition as we go. So for example, and I know there are technical experts in the room that might be able to give us some more realistic estimates here, but it might be feasible for us to adopt a net zero target for scope 1 and 2 sources by 2025, net zero from scope 3 by 2035, and net negative by 2040. The short-term targets could be achieved through an interim strategy that addresses some of those low-hanging fruits that Professor Howden was talking about before. And the longer term targets, which are some of the more difficult things that are more out of our control, it's scope 3 and the net negative, could be supported at this stage by target ranges based on the potential of emerging approaches and technologies. I think the point of regular technical reviews is really important because it allows the ANU Council to adjust the targets and strengthen their ambition over time. All right, so some final thoughts to throw into the mix. I think that leadership is about setting an example. So I think we should be looking to proactively engage with other institutions to accelerate national decarbonisation. I'm keen to hear what other people think would work for this, but it could be, for example, through regular white papers or other kinds of published reviews or discussion forums that share what we're learning and approaches that are working. There was a great presentation earlier in the week around the need to divest from fossil fuels as a way of sending a really strong signal that this industry has no place in our future. I know that that's a complicated point, so keen to hear more discussion on that. Again, I think the regular reviews and strengthening the ambition of our targets as we learn more. And finally, I think it's important to prioritise working with the ANU community and within our other institutional relationships with private sector and other researchers and the broader ACT community, because I think that a safe climate needs transformative social change as much as technological advances. Okay, that's a lot, so I'm going to stop sharing. I'm really keen to hear what others think as we go.
Thank you very much, Kate. And so our final panellist, and last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Janet Turpie-Johnstone, a PhD student at the ANU National Centre for Indigenous Studies, who's going to talk about current Australian society's extractive tendencies and its contrast with generational Indigenous approaches to country and what we can learn from that. So over to you, Janet.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you. I'd like to acknowledge, I'm also here in Melbourne, I'm in Outer East. I'd like to acknowledge our Kulin nations and the thousands of feet that have walked this land for those thousands of generations. I'd like to acknowledge all of those people and acknowledge all of you. This is a great project. My research is looking at what I've attempted to do through both art and word, is to analyse what the City of Melbourne, what the creation of the City of Melbourne's done to landscape. And so I'm going back to some pretty old stuff, looking at how water was drained and actually eliminated from the city, looking at how the river was transformed, looking at how technically, in terms of ancestral narratives, how country was turned into concrete and asphalt. And what I've discovered is that in that transformation, country has been completely fundamentally changed. It no longer operates as country. It no longer has the biospheric feedback loops. They've all been totally taken away by the anthropomorph, by turning everything into a human. It's only for humans. Cities only developed for humans. Now, the City of Melbourne, around the Birrarung pre-colonial times, was some of the most amazing swamplands that have been described as equal to Kakadu, and of course they were all drained and swamped. So one of the issues I've looked at is that lack of moisture, that lack of water in the atmosphere, which of course is being reflected globally in the hydrocycle. So the other thing that I then began to think about, that if this transformation of country into city, what does that mean? Where does the voice of country exist? Where do we hear country speak? And for Aboriginal people, that relationship in country, and when I talk about country, I'm talking about that whole biospheric forest, land, people, animals, creatures, sky, the whole thing operating together. So where do you see the voice of country? How do we hear that voice again to allow somehow nature to be part of this discussion? Because without nature being an active agent in all of this, we are still doing what we have been doing. We might be tinkering, we might be tinkering around the edges to some degree. So when I thought about what that means for ANU, how do I transfer that? I only know Melbourne. I can't talk for the landscape around Canberra. But when I think about my city, and the urgency for me is, how do I teach my young, now that I'm an elder, how do I teach my young, how do we care for country when we're living in cities? These are very big questions for us Aboriginal people, and I think the same for Canberra. So when I looked at the issues, and I'm thinking about how do we think about bringing the natural world back into this as a very active participant, and so my first idea is to return to where your feet stand. You have a remarkable acreage at ANU. Learn about the lay of that land. There's a creek that runs through it, and I'm aware of it, it's flooding. How do you keep watering that creek? How do you keep moisture skating around the atmosphere within just your own local, so that you start to remodel what it means to think about having nature as an active participant? Now, I've been able to do it with my home block. I moved into this as roses and lilacs, and now I have all natives, and I've got birds, and I've got insects, and I've got moisture, I've got cool summers, and I've got moderate winters just around the home. So I think when you look at how do you model this to the world, or how do you model it to the world around you, think about your acreage there at ANU. How do you redevelop that creek to allow the waters to be flowing all the time, so that you've got moisture, so that you've got animals, you've got creatures, planting trees, that absorption of carbon through trees, through grasses, through the natural, through natural vegetation, how to replant your gardens, rethink about what that may mean, and use that as an active model. Because what I'm trying to talk about is giving the land back its life and allowing it to have a voice and a presence. And I trust this doesn't seem awfully idealistic, and I have some very good examples across the state of Victoria where this has been done, but to really think about allowing our natural world, stop this extractive nonsense, the slaughters of animals, which is what technically the city of Melbourne is built on, the mass slaughter of creatures, along with the mass annihilation of forests, along with the waterways. And think about how you might think about or reflect on where your feet step, and how that might bring back the natural world around ANU back into a conversation about whose world is this anyway? Who does this really belong to? Allow some of those voices to speak. It's not a hard thing. Aboriginal people have been doing that here in Victoria. We're beginning to learn for over 120,000 years. Waminjaka, thank you.
Wow, Janet, that's a powerful call to arms. So thank you. And a wise and powerful call to give the land back its life and to listen to what it has to say. So thank you for that. We are now going to open the floor for discussion. So the way that we're going to operate this is please raise your hand by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom of the screen and then clicking on the button raise hands. What we'd like to do is ask folks to keep ideas and comments to 1 minute so that everyone can have a chance to contribute and we can interact with those ideas. Please feel free to submit ideas through the chat function if you want to speak up. We're going to put the etiquette slide up again just very briefly. Or not. Okay. Basically, the idea is to improve on ideas rather than critique them, avoid heavy jargon, and encourage everyone to contribute in a constructive way. If somebody has trouble sticking to those guidelines, then I'll let them know, and we may have to mute them, or in extreme circumstances, remove them. So let's open up. I saw a hand come and go very quickly. Whose hand was that who went up? Go on, be brave.
So I think we've got Demi Timming first. So Demi, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hello everyone. I'm a new climate change student as well, just like Kate. And I guess what I would like to bring to this discussion is the idea that I would like to see them emphasize and consider the co-benefits and the win-win scenarios that can really be taken out of those actions, scenarios that incorporate benefits for adaptation as well as biodiversity, building on what Jeanette said, and choosing targets that benefit more than just mitigation, so that it's a more holistic and sustainable and successful thing. Even though the focus is mitigation, I think we could tick many boxes, I think. And as far as leadership goes, I think as a student, targets should be really strong and ambitious because we have the opportunity to be a leader. And I think it would really encourage students to be interested in ANU and the courses that ANU has, especially in something like climate change, if they can get involved in these actions and they can see that it's happening and can see the action firsthand. So I think that would be really ideal.
Does anyone wish to build on that comment?
Look, I'll just pick that up. Thanks, Demi. Look, I think that's a really good suggestion, and we always sort of conceived the Below Zero program as being integrated with the teaching and the research. So it's not just about operations on campus, even though they're really important in terms of, say, buildings and infrastructure. The benefits of this, I think, come through that integration where we're all part of that journey, and the research and teaching are linked to that operation activity and vice versa.
Do any other panelists have anything they wish to chime in there? No, okay, then we'll go to Philip Taylor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks to all the panelists for speaking today, and actually for all the other of these workshops that they've been really, really interesting and thought-provoking. I just have a question today, and that is, so we have this sort of timescale that Kate alluded to, which is sort of a standard thing that you see. It's sort of a few decades to go to carbon neutral or carbon negative. But what I was wondering is this ambitious enough? And so, for example, if every individual and every organization and every nation on the planet adopted this sort of this timescale for reduction of emissions today, what would that actually mean for climate change? Would that keep us below 1.5 degrees by 2040, or yeah? So I think if we're going to be a leader in this field, we want to be, we really want to be pushing it down as quickly as possible, and not sort of just getting to 1.5 just when it's okay to do so, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Philip. Is there anyone on the panel who'd like to pick that up?
I'll sort of jump in a little bit, but Brian might want to comment as well. The sort of outline of or timing of actions that Kate raised is actually consistent with keeping temperatures globally to within 1.5 if everyone did it. The problem is, of course, not everyone is doing what they said they'd do. So governments, by and large, aren't keeping to their Paris Agreement commitments to reduce emissions. And that commits us to warming well above 1.5. In fact, it's very hard now to see how we'd stay below 1.5 with current trajectories. But I think our view is it's not just good enough to comply with the mid-range, because what you actually see in the analysis is that there's quite a variance around that. So in fact that quite substantial emission reductions don't necessarily lead to 1.5. And so I think a risk management approach would be, say, let's do it as quickly as possible. And that was very much the statement that the Vice Chancellor made when launched Below Zero. And so I think we'll be working a strategy out over the next months, pulling in these ideas, consulting with the various parts of the university and more broadly, and we will be coming out with a trajectory of emission reductions over the next few months now.
And if I can just intersect, I mean, I guess maybe this is worthwhile discussing amongst the panelists. There are things that are hard to reduce. Gas is embedded in our campus in ways that, I wished it wasn't, and I'm not going to be able to replace it with hydrogen anytime soon. We are going to probably do some air travel, but there are immediate sinks that we can invest in, whether it be, forests and rainforests. And, one of the things I look at is Brazil going to turn into a savanna rather than a rainforest? And it's not everything, but we can get increasingly sophisticated over time and maybe be a little more aggressive than what was up on there. And maybe that's the timeline where we don't use sinks to help us get across the line now. But I think we do need to be more aggressive.
Right.
So I'm just going to point a few people to some dynamic chat that's going on in the chat window. There's some very interesting and useful amplification comments in there, particularly around Philip's question to do with bringing forward targets and timescales. I'm going to now go to Chilaka Fernando.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you, Vice Chancellor and Senior Leadership, for this commitment given to students taking ANU below zero. And of course, thank you, Mark, and your team for this execution consultation. I have actually a comment. I see a synergy of taking this initiative of taking all students. I mean, a lot of students, they are fond of to hear what's happening positive on environment. So it's a positive tone, positive vibe. So really, we really need positive vibes these days. So it's very appreciated. But more than that, I have a very kind of a different comment in management perspective. So I think there are two strategic intent university expects from this. One is actually, of course, is a good way to reduce operational costs. Other one is strategic positioning through non-marketing strategies. So in both aspects, I think more transparent target setting, more strategic target setting, and transparent reporting is very important. So I made this idea in idea note as well. So a lot of universities like Cambridge, they are going with SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiative, connecting GAG with, as Philip just mentioned, connecting to how the global temperature fluctuations and all, and also systems like ISO 14064 more transparent and more credible when we put numbers. So I request from the management team as well as who will drive the project to consider these two elements. Thanks.
So is there anyone on the panel who'd like to pick that up? And I particularly saw that in the forum for lodging ideas, there was quite a lot of commentary around following globally accepted reporting and target setting initiatives, which comes to the transparency thing again. Is anyone able to comment from a perspective of knowing how these work?
To be honest, I don't know how they work, but I want to.
That's a good aspiration, Paul.
Yeah, and I remember when the carbon pricing was being brought in, was it 10 years ago or thereabouts, and I was at another university, and we started to measure, and we started to actually have board level reports gearing up for the impact, and suddenly we started talking about change. We started talking about planning better, and so the fact that, you know, at the top level we have reports about people, we have reports about finances, we have reports about strategies. We don't have reports about greenhouse gas emissions, and we're not part of a sort of a generally accepted consistency of reporting. And I think we should be.
Just a quick addition to Paul's comment. I think it's good risk management opportunity as well, because some people are looking at are you greenwashing? So it's good to say, no, it's not greenwashing. These are our numbers, steady and all.
Exactly, know your numbers. Yeah. I mean, we do know it on the investment side. That actually is discussed quite extensively in the Finance Committee, which is good to see.
Cool, thank you. So next question goes to Satis Bartolakas.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much. Very, very exciting and inspiring talks and contributions from everybody. I'm a professor of global environmental health at ANU, and my interest is very strongly in public health in relation to environmental protection and climate change mitigation and adaptation. I think, you know, going back to the question whether the timing is good, I think the timing is perfect to bring in this program. It's an imperative and a huge opportunity now in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the bushfires, to build back better housing, better communication systems, better transport. And that has the potential to provide co-benefits for health through better diets, active travel, physical activity, healthier buildings, better air quality. There are so many co-benefits that we can highlight, and many of those can be quantified and monetized. So there's a very strong argument for the program, the Below Zero program, in terms of public health. And I think that it's very important. It's an opportunity for us to highlight that through our research, our teaching, and also our engagement with the community and advocacy. So thanks and congratulations to everybody for being involved in this project, in this program of work. And as I said, I think, the timing couldn't be any better.
Thanks for that, Satis. You posted a really good comment in the chat too, so I'd encourage everyone to keep track of those as well. Does anyone wish to amplify on that comment?
Just agree entirely, that's all.
That makes the conversation go fast. I might, at this point, actually, interestingly, does Samantha, would you like to comment on the survey? Because it speaks to the way that our community is feeling at the moment.
Hi everyone, thank you. I'm Samantha Stanley and this is Zoe Leatherston, and we did this survey on the ANU community's attitudes towards emissions reductions. So we recently surveyed just over 550 staff and student members, and we found support for everything that's been said here really. So people are really supportive of this Below Zero initiative, really excited about it, it seems. So close to 90% of people who responded thought that it would positively impact the university's reputation, and we had over 80% saying that it would have at least some to a great deal of impact on ANU providing leadership to other organisations. So that really speaks to what other people have brought up here. Just touching on Demi's point as well, you mentioned how maybe students might be willing to come to the ANU if they see this great initiative. And we did find that 80% said that staff are more likely to stay and come to the ANU if we implement this, and same with students. So some really interesting findings there. Do you want to mention a couple?
Yeah, I was just saying, so we asked people about 26 potential initiatives that ANU could do based on the initial thinking coming out of BZI, and there was support across the board. So we asked them things like maximising energy efficiency of buildings, phasing out gas, improving bicycle infrastructure, that kind of thing. So yeah, support across the board, and no really meaningful differences in support levels between staff and students. So that was really interesting to see. There's a lot of consensus there. But just coming back to leadership, because it's come up a few times in the comments section there. So we asked, of those 26 initiatives, what should be a priority action, one priority? And almost a third of participants selected the same one. So it was ANU becoming an international leader in acting to address climate change. So those kind of results together suggest that there's a really big awareness and appetite from the ANU community about the symbolic benefits that such an initiative like this can confer.
That's really interesting, thank you. Does anyone on the panel or in the room wish to comment on that? No? Oh, I can hear a voice.
Where? That came in some package.
Okay, I'm going to go to Catherine Vincent.
Hi, I would like to thank everyone on the panel for their great perspectives in this workshop. And I suppose I just sort of have maybe an opportunity that jumped out at me after Jeanette's talk on like the growing separation between humans and nature that's been occurring for a very long time. And it probably also speaks to Demi's point a little bit as well, in that I see an opportunity to design our spaces so that we are, at ANU, we are closer to nature. And that will change how we feel about it, and that will trickle down into our behaviour and how we operate at the ANU. And there's also something in the discussion around how we use our buildings and retrofitting our old buildings, and how we change that going forward, particularly after COVID, and we're having discussions on how our working life might change. And I think maybe it was just stimulated by Mark's discussion on actually multiple energy output systems, in that it doesn't need to be a single input and a single output. And I just, yeah, happy to hear any comments on that way of thinking, I guess.
Someone from the panel?
I'm happy.
Oh, Janet, excellent.
Just a small comment. I think, yeah, it's something that requires time, of course, but we do know we have that it does, the relationship back with nature does change behaviours and attitudes, and that can be shown globally in quite a few places. And I was thinking, I know when I was sitting at ANU last October when I was up on the campus, And I was sitting in that main thoroughfare. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with names. And all I could hear was air conditioning noises. And I thought, isn't it sad that we don't build buildings to take advantage of, the shade of trees or, the flow of air and, the way the sun moves across the sky, isn't it? So I would like to add that into the conversation, that I think there needs to be a lot more consciousness about how, nature, how land, country operates within that whole sort of cosmic, if you want to, I want to keep us at our feet. I don't want us to get, but yeah, to really think about our buildings and how they can take advantage of heat and cold. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else from the panel or from the room who'd like to?
Can I just add as well? Janet, I'd love to meet you actually, Janet. I don't know which suburb you're in, but one day we might go for a walk and see
Lilydale.
Lilydale, okay. See if our 5Ks intersect. I'm in Brunswick. But one of the projects I was really proud of working on in the University of Melbourne was the Student Precinct project, which looked at revitalising the waterway that was hidden underneath.
It's great.
Hidden underneath underneath concrete, basically, on its way down through to come out somewhere near Flinders Street Station, I think it was, and the eel migration that was part of that right the way down the east coast. So yeah, I was thinking this morning actually before this, what about if we had one of our strategies was rewild Acton campus?
Yeah, exactly.
And what would that look like? Because it's viewed as being one of the really positive attributes of ANU being the campus, but it's still a very much it's almost a curated version. It's a kind of Central Park version of wild rather than actually being genuinely wild. It'd be kind of fun. I don't know what the compliance people would say about it, but yeah, the Canberra watercourse intervention recently, possibly made things even more sort of industrial and anyway, it's just a thought. It's probably more than a thought.
Yeah, thank you. Great thought.
Yeah, tremendous thought.
Just a quick comment and to build on that various people have said is that I think we do need to think really long term. So when we put up a building, we're putting something up there for decades, and we need to think decadally, and that needs to be really, really strategic. So it's not just that there's going to be a footprint of that building, which accumulates over decades. There's costs associated with that building accumulated over decades. And so we need to have that whole of life view. Yeah. And really importantly, we need to be planning for those buildings to be in a warmer changed climate. Is that we need to look forwards. We can't afford to look back.
Absolutely.
Absolutely agree. The notion of rewilding has taken off in the chat, so
good.
This is excellent. So I'm going to go to Gottfried Otting now.
Fantastic.
The Below Zero initiative I find is really important, but how comes that ANU Council decided earlier this year to remove utility bills from the school budgets, ostensibly to help with budget recovery? There's obviously no greater incentive than the financial kind. I work at the Research School of Chemistry, which has annual utility costs in the $1 million per annum league. Minor. So now we lost the incentive to save energy. We don't care. We don't even get to know how much we consume. What signal does this send?
I can take that one, and I agree, Gottfried. It's a temporary measure, but I absolutely want to reinstate proper allocation of those charges. Absolutely. Haven't spoken to Brian about that yet, but
Brian's just put a comment in the chat.
Yes, it will come back. Yeah, so it was an attempt to make the finances simpler and try to reduce some of the what you might call doing business with yourself, which is probably not particularly helpful. But I think this is actually a really useful piece of it that we need to reinstate. And Brian has agreed. That's good. Okay.
Okay. So Melanie Pill, go to you.
Thank you, and hi everyone. So the points I guess I wanted to make, they probably go already in a lot of things that people have said here. So one of the things was in relation to the targets that Kate and Mark talked about, and I think it's really important that we should look at the targets that are already outlined internationally. So I'm thinking about the IPCC targets, and also it was mentioned in the chat that we should be looking at the SDGs and the co-benefits that some of the initiatives will will provide. So I guess that will give ANU a lot of credibility, and also in terms of having that, showcasing that internationally as a great university amongst the, I guess, the elite out there. So we're not great in just academic outputs, but also great in protecting our environment and actually sticking to international targets and ambitions. So yeah, so that's one point. Then I think ANU has a great opportunity to be really innovative, especially when it comes to our Scope 3 emissions. So I'm looking particularly in things like food. That's always really is a lot of the time really neglected. So looking at those methane emissions, reducing especially our meat consumption on campus. So I don't think there is, I think there's only one place that now sells just vegetarian meals. So it's really hard to find something that is without meat on campus. So just speaking as a student from my own experience. And I think I disagree a little bit with that. We don't have any low-hanging fruits here on campus anymore. I think there are still a lot up for grabs, especially in Canberra, even though it's a fantastic facility and looks great. There are a lot of things I think that we could do on campus still, especially when we look around the Canberra precinct. And then I think one really important thing is we're talking here, we have really great suggestions and what we can do and what we have to do. We're coming up with great ideas. Some really, we all have our ambitions. But I think though what we really need, and I'm now directing my talk a little bit to the Vice Chancellor, is the leadership from the top. I think studies in the past have shown that if there's no leadership from the top, that it's really hard to make bigger changes. So the leadership that we've shown in terms of the response to COVID and the fantastic outcome we had here on the ANU campus in keeping cases to zero, basically, is something that needs to also translate into our climate change ambitions. So I had this this slide or this flow chart in mind that was sent out when we're going to be back on campus and what are the dates, and we really had targets. We really knew what's going to happen, and translating that into climate change targets and having it official, sent out to students and make that clear amongst staff. I think this is something really important that we have to keep in mind. So that's for me a way forward, having it really official and everybody is aware of it. So yeah, thank you.
Melanie, I'm conscious that we're right on 1 o'clock, so I'm going to take that as a comment, and I'm going to take it that Brian has heard that suggestion. So I just wanted to very quickly wrap up to Rosalind, Sarah and Stephen. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. I'd encourage you to write your comments and questions in the ideas chat forum. The link is way at the top of the chat if you want it. And I'd encourage you to put it there so that people can interact. We're also going to scrape all of the comments and questions from the chat panel because they've been incredibly constructive and useful as well. So with that, I'd just like to thank everyone for their constructive, engaged and passionate discourse today. Stay in touch, send emails to below zero, go to the ideas chat, and I'm now going to release you into your day to enjoy a lovely Canberra Spring Day. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day, and thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you.